NetCredit is here to say yes to a personal loan or line of credit when other lenders say no. Apply in minutes and get a decision as soon as the same day. If approved, applications are typically funded the next business day or sooner. Loans offered by NetCredit or lending partner banks and serviced by NetCredit. Application subject to review and approval. Learn more at netcredit.com/partner. NetCredit. Credit to the people.
Here's this thing, God comes walking on the water and we think God's a ghost, but God's a human. And that there is supposed to get us to think differently about our lives and about how God works in our lives. Because oftentimes we can spiritualize our problems. The problems in our life are financial. So we say, well, I'm not praying enough. But if I prayed enough, then God's going to bless me and I'm going to have a breakthrough. We spiritualize the problem when it's actually a material problem that we're experiencing. But if we spiritualize a problem, we're going to spiritualize an answer. We're going to have a ghost. We're going to have an apparition that is not going to actually it's not going to work when you try to put flesh and bones on it and walk on the ground. Well, welcome to the Liminal Living Podcast. We got a different kind of a podcast today. I've done some Ask Me Anything episodes, and I've done some interviews with people who share their stories and some authors who share their ideas and perspectives. And today, I pre-recorded a sermon for when I was away on vacation that they could just kind of play it at our small little community. And I thought it was a really interesting take on a parabolic passage from Matthew 14, where Christ walks on the water and calms the storm. And I kind of go and explain what that means. But a lot of messages and sermons are a form of theological colonialism, where we're trying to convince others that our theology is the best way, our understanding of things is the best way, and we're trying to make converts into our form of thinking. And I'm experimenting with a different way of preaching, which is not trying to standardize and uniformly arrange all the people with proper thoughts inside of their brain. We're actually congregational, which congregationalism is kind of like a democratic approach to doing church, but also a democratic approach to doing theology. So I'm not trying to convince people of long doctrinal statements with bullet points and all those things. I present ideas and I let them grow in our small community. So we are not creedal, we're covenantal. And our creed is actually only 7 statements long. And every person who comes to our church has the freedom to interpret those 7 sayings how their conscience how they see fit in their own conscience with the guidance of the Spirit, and remaining in a covenantal community with us in our localized neighborhood church. So today's passage out of Matthew is kind of an attempt that I thought was, I kind of went into some interesting places that kind of developed as I was teaching it. And I'm trying to steer away from theological colonialism into more tending the garden of people's souls with a message. So I thought I'd share it with you, and I hope that you have got some kind of access when you go to a church of this style of preaching, and that you're not just being beat over the head in a theological colonialism kind of a way where they're just trying to convince you that their beliefs are right and better than other people's beliefs, and if you just embraced them, then you would be right and good as the pastor is, or just as the leaders are, or just as the denomination is. So we can reject colonialism in its forms, especially when it's religious. So this sermon is an attempt to do that, and I hope that you enjoy it, and it sparks some thoughts and gets you looking in your community for possibly places that would allow you to also explore your own thoughts and be the gardener of your own soul. So that is my little blurb about why I'm posting a sermon here on my podcast. I'm not going to hold you up anymore. Let's dive into Matthew 14. All right, so we got a really fun passage here out of Matthew 14. It's really dramatic. It's really, it's one of Jesus's big and well-known miracles. He comes out walking on the water and calms a storm, which you can imagine, trillions of gallons of water coming to a standstill in just a second. Like if you've ever been in a swimming pool where you cannonball in, there's a lot of waves. It takes the water a while to calm down. And here we have this just amazing passage where trillions of gallons of water on a sea just become calm instantaneously. So this is a big, dramatic kind of a miracle, and we're going to kind of dive in and discover what's here. Now, one of the things we got to keep in mind is the writing style of Matthew. He's writing with a specific style, and he has a specific message for a specific audience. And it's always good to take these things into consideration because that helps us understand what they were trying to get across. So if we can enter their world a little bit, and this is what I love to do. I love to nerd out in this fashion and try and really figure out how did the people receive this? What did it mean to them? And then we kind of pull strings and say, okay, now that we know what it means for them, how can we apply this for us? And I love to keep things nicely, neat, and packaged in their context that way. So the writing style of this miracle is something called parabolic. Now, you know that Jesus loves to teach in parables. He taught his disciples in parables. We've looked over a couple of his parables. And those parables are meant to convey meaning and spark imagination. And now we have this story. While it's not a parable as in just a story that Matthew made up. I mean, this probably happened. He's recounting something that Jesus did. Jesus had a miraculous life. He was God incarnate on earth. I don't have any doubts in my mind that Jesus walked on water and calmed a storm. What we have to do is note the writing style of this moment is parabolic. So Matthew was one of Jesus's disciples, and he learned from Jesus in parables. So he learned how to tell parables. So oftentimes Jesus would tell a parable that was based on a historic something that happened. And then he would take it into a teaching moment. I think that's what Matthew's trying to do here, because when we look at the vocabulary that he uses and the language that he uses and the Old Testament passages that he's kind of drawing into this moment, he's kind of doing it in this parabolic form that helps us. He's trying to communicate some kind of a truth to the community he's writing in. So these are people, they're going to be kind of Hebrews that have accepted Christ as Messiah. That's who Matthew is writing to, is Messianic Hebrew folks. And they're a small group of a church somewhere in that Middle Eastern realm. And he's writing to them, and he has a specific understanding. He's trying to open their minds that this is not just what we thought it was. It's not just our small little group, our small little Hebrew race, ethnic, national. This isn't us. This thing, God, is for the world. And he's kind of opening the doors of their expectations of who God is and what God has done in the person of Christ. So that's what Matthew's trying to do, specifically get religious Hebrew people who are Messianic to understand that this is not their thing, but the world's thing. Christ has done something global. And this parable that Matthew tells of Christ walking on the water and calming the storm, while most likely rooted in a historic event that Jesus did, is written as a parable so that we understand some truths. Now, the first thing we got to take note, in a parable, Jesus is going to do some confusing things. They're not going to quite make sense with who we know Jesus to be, but it's going to fit the parabolic narrative writing style. So the first thing we got to take note of is that Jesus dismisses the disciples. He tells them, I want you to get in a boat and I want you to go to the other side of the lake. I'll catch you on the other side," kind of a thing. And that's something it happens immediately after he hears about John the Baptist kind of getting beheaded, and it was his cousin. So a family member has died at the hands of Herod, who's also chasing after Jesus and trying to pin him down. And so he hears about all this stuff, and he wants to go by himself and pray for a while. And there he is alone, and he dismisses his disciples. So there's going to be, what the first parabolic point is, there's going to be times that you feel abandoned by God. Now, the people receiving this story, the book of Matthew, and reading it through, they might be wondering, like, where is God and God's provision and God's rescue in the midst of us feeling abandoned here? So there are going to be times when you feel dismissed by Jesus or dismissed by God. And they are actually a natural season of faith where it feels as though God is absent in your life, not there. There's no warm and fuzzy feelings when you think of God, or when you try to pray, or when you read your Bible, or even go to church. There might be even seasons when you don't want to do these things. And you're going to feel dismissed and abandoned by God. And this story that Matthew is telling opens up with that phrase that these disciples are dismissed by Jesus. And our interpretation of that moment is taken into account in this story, right? The command is to the disciples, I want you to go to the other side. And the interesting thing is that they fulfill that command with the help of Jesus. They're going to cross the lake and they're going to get to the other side. But they're going to get battered by the waves on their way over. They're going to hit a storm. And it says that, early in the morning, this wind comes and was against the disciples. The wind is absolutely contrary to what the disciples are going to do. And this moment here in the boat, where they're trying to get to where God has told them to go, but the winds are pushing against them and preventing them from getting there. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever been in your life and you feel like you think God has something for you over here and God has commanded you to get there, but everything in your life is fighting against getting to that moment, and you feel abandoned and dismissed by God and battered by the waves? And the description points here that Matthew uses, he says they're far from land, the wind is against us, and now he says it's late at night, but it also says the fourth hour. And according to Hebrew, how they keep time is they divide the night into 4 sections. And when the sun, when it's a period of more sun, they still divide the night into 4 sections, 4 hours. But when, you get into those times when, the sun is very limited, like you get into winter solstice, they'll have a shorter night. They're still going to divide into 4 hours. So I don't know what part of the season they're in, but they're on the last part of the night. It can't get any darker before this moment. They're far from land. Rescue is not coming. And the wind is against them. The pressure will not let up. And this, I'm sure, you felt this moment. You've been in these moments where you feel abandoned by God, that rescue is not coming, and the pressure of life is just battering against you, and there's no letting up. And it's now the 4th hour. It's the darkest hour of the night, and you're not sure what you're going to do and how you're going to get through it. Those moments are natural to times of faith. And there's this early understanding about how God is like this person that comes in and swoops and rescues you from all the things that could go wrong in your life and bad in your life. And that understanding of God might work for early seasons. And then when you hit utter tragedy, or when you hit burnout, or when you hit just a season of I'm tired and I can't think, I can't care about stuff anymore. When you hit those seasons, that God no longer makes sense. And that's when we start to learn a new form of understanding who God is and how God actually works in our lives, and how faith is supposed to work in the lives that we actually have, not in the idealized understandings of who we hope God is or think God is. When God starts working in our life, sometimes it feels like God is like this ghostly figure distant from us. And in our early forms of this, the disciples actually think that Jesus is a ghost when he starts walking out on the water. And ghosts have no physical body. They're just kind of apparitions. They're kind of specters. That's actually the Greek word. We get the word specter is what's used here to describe Jesus. They think he's a specter. And their understanding of the sea at this point is that that's the place of the dead, the roots of the earth, Sheol, the place you go to when you die. It's all on the bottom of the sea, because they had a flat earth understanding, and down at the bottom of the earth is going to be that's where all the dead go. That's the underworld. And they're going to have a mishmash of understandings and stories about what that means. So Jesus walking on the water, they think there's like some kind of spirit from the underworld that has actually come up and come to here. But what is interesting is they think that this is a ghost, but it's not. It's the human form of God in Christ. God is fully human and fully divine. So God actually knows what the human experience is like because of the life of Christ. So here's this thing, God comes walking on the water and we think God's a ghost, but God's a human. And that there is supposed to get us to think differently about our lives and about how God works in our lives. Because oftentimes we can spiritualize our problems. The problems in our life are financial. So we say, well, I'm not praying enough. But if I prayed enough, then God's going to bless me and I'm going to have a breakthrough. We spiritualize the problem when it's actually a material problem that we're experiencing. But if we spiritualize a problem, we're going to spiritualize an answer. We're going to have a ghost. We're going to have an apparition that is not going to actually it's not going to work when you try to put flesh and bones on it and walk on the ground. And so this idea that Christ is a ghost coming to them on the water is supposed to get us to think, no, Christ is not a ghost. God is not some spiritual immaterial thing. God is not some spiritual reality out there that makes no sense in the physical lived experience of life. God has flesh and bone and blood in Christ, and God knows what it's like to have a human experience. So we're not supposed to spiritualize our problems and then try to spiritualize our answers, and then nothing in our life changes except, what's inside of our brain and how we're interpreting things. We need to humanize our problems and find human answers to our problems, because Christ is the human form of God, and Christ is not a ghost. And so we have to understand that if we spiritualize our problems, we're going to get spiritualized answers. It's not going to make much sense in the real world, in the lives that we actually live. And we don't have to do this. We don't have to spiritualize our problems because we're spiritual people and God's a spiritual being. We're all humans here. And our human problems need to have human answers. And faith is the tool that helps us actually plug in our understanding of God into the lived experience of who we are on this planet. And so we don't have to spiritualize our problems, say our money problems, or because we don't have enough faith. Or a lot of spiritual, like those prosperity gospel preachers are going to tell you that. They're going to spiritualize the problem of money instead of humanize it. And then they're going to get rich off of it. And we don't have to do that. Christ is not some spiritual apparition that we have to then become spiritualized persons. Christ is human. Our problems are human. And our answers can be human. And faith is solving those problems in the manner that Christ would have done so, in love, because God is love. And Christ taught us how to live the Sermon on the Mount. Faith says the way that Christ taught us to live is the better way, even though we might get bigger metrics doing it a different way, even though we might be able to cheat on this and lie on this and get better metrics over here. Faith tells us that love is the better way and that God is good. And that even though we're being battered by wind and waves, it's not because we're abandoned by God, but because we have a very human problem in a very human world. And then we've been spiritualizing the problems over here and trying to spiritualize the answers over here and saying, you know what? Faith says love is the better way, and it's going to be hard and it's going to be difficult, but I believe it's best. That's what faith is supposed to do, give us trust in the way that Christ told us. Now, it says here that Christ comes out walking on the water, and he gives a command to the disciples in the boat. And the command is this: take courage. Now, the really interesting phrase about take courage, like, okay, what am I supposed to just be like not scared? Like, how do I just dismiss anxiety, right? Like, you can't, because anxiety is a chemical released in the brain that is responding, then it triggers the nervous system, and the nervous system then tells you you're not safe, and then you get into fight or flight mode. And we're supposed to just what? Take courage? Like, not be anxious? Tell our nervous system to cut it out? Like, you all know that don't work. That's, again, spiritualizing the problem and getting a spiritual answer. We're supposed to just be brave and trust Jesus, and all his spiritual problems will have spiritual answers, but human problems need to have human answers. And Christ is human, and it's okay to say, you know what, I'm going to be anxious, and it's going to trigger my nervous system, and I'm going to have trauma responses to certain things. The command by Christ, take courage, is not to just try and dismiss those through some kind of a spiritual bypassing that says, I'll just go around this and not care about this. The command, take courage, means claim your confidence. And that's a hard, you're supposed to grab hold of your own confidence in who God has made you to be and who God has declared you to be. You are loved, you are enough, and problems of life are difficult. But you can claim your confidence that the problems you're experiencing and the problems that you're trying to overcome but can't seem to get on the other side of are not because you are an insufficient person. Claim your confidence and say, no, it's really just this hard. It's really just this difficult to take on the problems of life, the human problems of life. They're messy. We have economic problems that are not your fault. We have economic problems that are our fault as a humanity, and it's not an administration's fault. It is an ongoing human problem globally, historically. So when we personalize these systemic things that make our life difficult, or we try to throw blame on the people that we do not like, what it does is it gets around the actual problem, makes us insecure, or it makes us somebody that wants to attack somebody else. So Christ coming here saying, claim your confidence. You are who you are. You are enough. You are a wonderful, beautiful human being made in the image of God. And then he says, this other part goes with it. Claim your confidence. And then he says, I am is with you. And it doesn't really spell that out in the English translation, but this is a reference to Moses' interaction with Yahweh when that shrub in the desert was on fire but not being consumed. Moses asked, if you really want me to go to the big superpower of Egypt and let these people, claim, let my people go, you got to tell me who you are so I can tell them who you are. And Yahweh actually responds, I am who I am. Or I will be who I will be. And it's a really confusing phrase, but this is the holy name of God that we get the name Yahweh from, because it's 4 verbs and it sounds like breathing. So here, Christ gives the command, take courage, claim your confidence, because the I am is with you. And that's the same thing that he told Moses. I will be with you. The I am is going to go with you, and I will be with you as you take on the difficulties of, speaking truth to this big global superpower called Egypt. Now, Peter, bless his heart. We got to use the Southern phrase, bless his heart. Peter says, no, I don't want to claim my confidence. I don't want to take courage. I don't want to trust in the I am is with me. He actually says, I want you to give me a different command. I want you to command me to go out onto the water and meet you. So this is a really interesting interaction between Jesus and Peter. He gives a command, take courage, and Peter's like, I want you. I want to act on your command, and I want to act on your confidence. I don't have enough of my own. And he would rather act under Jesus's authority and be safe under this umbrella of Jesus. He has no confidence in himself and who God has made him to be. But faith is acting under the God-given authority of your authentic self. Like God made you to be how you are. And fear causes us to live outside of who we are, causes us to act out, and causes us to live outside of love. And when people get caught up into fear and insecurities, they can do some pretty nasty and mean things, and they can, accumulate a whole bunch of money and power and abuse and all. People do a lot of bad things because they're afraid of who God has actually made them to be. And they don't want to claim their own confidence. They'd rather claim the confidence of somebody else. The sky daddy up in the sky, God's up there, the big man, and I'd rather claim the confidence of some spiritual specter out in the sphere than to actually live out an embodied form of who that God is in my own existence. And that, Jesus here, he says, then come out on the water. Now, this really interesting thing, he's not really honoring Christ's request, command me to come to you on the water, because the Greek word here, he tells him to step out and come to me. But it's not just, come on over here. There's like this really rich word. It's a common word, but there's so much richness here that when things come into being, they're made, and it's like they just kind of came into existence. Like that word is used about things coming into existence. So Christ here is telling Peter, claim your confidence. He says, no, I'd rather claim your confidence. I'd rather act on your authority. I'd rather have you tell me to come out to you. And Jesus says, step into your own being. Step into your own becoming. Come out on the water. So he kind of revisits the original command of claim your confidence, but in a different way. He says, come into your being. And Peter then steps out onto the water. It says that, he looks at the wind, he looks at the waves, he takes his eyes off Christ, and then he starts to sink. And most often we hear this, when everything's all harried and scary, and if you take your eyes off Jesus, you're going to start sinking, right? It's not necessarily what's going on here. We can say that, but Christ is embodied within our own existence. Christ, we're incarnations of Christ. So it's not keeping our eyes on Jesus by just reading your Bible and praying and doing all the right things. But we have a Christ indwelling in our own bodies that we're to keep our eyes on. We're to claim our own confidence in our own being and step into our own being like Peter does. And then when we get nervous about, things that we see going on around us, we've lost sight of the confidence that Christ has given us inside. But the thing is that Christ is not the fixer of our problems, but the empowering presence to overcome them. You see, we are a people who overcome. And the interesting thing here is when Christ steps into the boat, the water is all calmed, and people worship him. This truly was the Son of God. And there is like this authority that Jesus has over the chaos of the world. The water remains, but is now calmed into its natural state. Now, the people receiving this letter of Matthew, reading this parabolic form of this miracle, they're going to interpret this moment as our difficulties remain, but coming into our own being is the way that we overcome them, is the way that we can overcome them. It's not that God, if we keep our eyes on Jesus, he'll eventually calm the storms of our life, but keeping our eyes on the Christ that indwells within us and who that Christ is trying to live us into our own being, the difficulties around us are going to remain. They might even amp up because we're now more aware of things around us. But when we come into our own being, we're able to overcome them a lot easier. So Jesus has authority over the world. That's this kind of the calming the waves is a parabolic message that Jesus has authority over the chaos of the world. But then there's this authority within the difficulty, right? Jesus does not calm the storms of difficulty in our life just like that. And that can feel like abandonment. Jesus gives us authority to walk upon the waters of difficulty. And Jesus preserves our souls, regardless of our mental or emotional states of our faith and what we're thinking and how we're feeling about the world. It's not about being like a not anxious person that is just has this flamboyant confidence in life. This is about coming into our own being of who God made us, that there's a promise that Christ preserves our souls. There's this wonderful quote by a pastor named Eugene Peterson. He wrote the Message version of the Bible. So he literally wrote the Bible, rewrote it at least. And he has this wonderful quote that says, all of the waters of the ocean cannot sink a ship unless it gets inside. That's when the ships sink, is when the hulls are breached and the water comes in and it sinks the ship, because then it loses its buoyancy. The promise of Christ is not that he's going to calm every storm for us and make everything all better, because sometimes that doesn't happen. The promise is that Jesus preserves our souls. He promises the water will not get inside of our souls and we will be sunk. And that doesn't mean that we'll never feel anxious about the things around us. It means that we are preserved even to and through death. So if your problems then lead to death, there was a lot of martyrs in the early church, plenty of martyrs. Is God not taking care of them? Did he not answer their prayers? Did he abandon them too? They were the most faithful, and they had the clearest picture of God's provision to and through death on the other side. And it says that Christ gets in the boat. Now this is the final kind of piece here. But this is supposed to represent the community of the people of God that saves us from the waters of the world, like Noah's Ark does. And that's another parable of the Old Testament that we're supposed to think in parable form. So we actually participate in this saving, in this rescue, by building localized, inclusive communities contrary to the exclusive power structures of the empires of the world. I know it's a really big statement, but that's what this boat symbolizes. They're not a part of the big Roman government. They don't have a say in, all of the republic hearings and the governments. They have nothing. They are under the oppression of a larger governing oppressive force. And they have absolutely no say and no right. And Jesus says, don't try and destroy that. Don't try and wage war on that. What I want you to do is build a community around my way of living. It'll be a boat, and it will save you. It will provide sanity. It will provide connection. It will provide you the relational beauty to enjoy life. When you have a small community of people that love you, that are, they're committed to you and your good and your well-being. When you have localized, inclusive communities that are contrary to the exclusive power structures of empires, you have a boat and it sails on the water. And within these communities, we gather around this confession, truly you are the Son of God. And this is a confession that says, not just we believe Jesus is who Jesus said he was, but that how Jesus said to live is also the best way to live. It's a confession that says Jesus is that Son of God, and everything that Jesus commanded us to live out is the best way to do it. And we have faith in the person and the pathway that Christ laid out for us. And doing that in small localized communities is the saving power of this parable and of this thing we call the church that saves us by getting us in communities around each other. So all the waters of the ocean cannot sink a ship unless it gets inside. And Jesus preserves your soul, protects your hull so that you are not sunk, even to death and through death. Well, hey, thank you so much for listening to the Liminal Living podcast. I hope you enjoyed a little taste of what our community is all about, what we're trying to do. This is just one of my sermons that I repurposed for the podcast here, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you like this podcast, if it's helpful for you, if you could, like it and subscribe it and maybe share it with some friends or whatever, leave a review, star us with 4 stars or 5 stars or whatever stars you think we deserve, except if you're going to do a 1 star, just move on. Don't troll me. I ain't got time for that. But yeah, if you like it, do something about it, do something with it. And Next week, we have an interview that I have done with a couple that experienced some church abuse, and that should be released next week. And they kind of got a really difficult story. So we're going to explore that and hopefully expose more theological, religious colonialism in play, and for what it is, abuse, empire, everything that Jesus stood against, and give us a better way. So we'll see you next week.
Mom deserves the best, and there's no better place to shop for Mother's Day than Whole Foods Market. They're your destination for unbeatable savings, from premium gifts to show-stopping flowers and irresistible desserts. Start by saving 33% with Prime on all body care and candles. Then get a 15-stem bunch of tulips for just $9.99 each with Prime. Round out Mom's menu with festive rosé, irresistible berry chantilly cake, and more special treats. Come celebrate Mother's Day at Whole Foods Market.